Engage someone in a discussion on the significance of Ringo Starr to the Beatles to find out how much they don't know about music. If someone paints Ringo as a small role in the Beatles, you know he's missing the overall picture and only comparing the other three's singing and creative prowess to Don't Pass Me By and Octopus Garden. And then, there's the whole thing about Ringo not being able to play the drums, which we'll get to later. People love to recycle tired argument gambits like, he's the luckiest guy in show business, he was just along for the ride, or Ringo wasn't even the best drummer in the Beatles. That nasty quote attributed to John Lennon that everyone from Beatles historian Mark Lewison to Snopes has proven was uttered by a forgotten British comedian in 1983, 3 years after Lennon died. The Beatles were fortunate to have Ringo as their timekeeper, and there were numerous occasions when Ringo saved them from completely losing the plot. So, in today's video, we've assembled 10 reasons why Ringo Starr was the most significant. We'll go over each one in detail, so stay with us till the finish of the film, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Number 10. The Beatles held Ringo in high respect as a skilled musician. Don't think the Beatles were fortunate to have Ringo? Consider how John praised Ringo's qualities from the beginning in his 1980 Playboy interview. Before we met, Ringo was a star in his own right in Liverpool. He was a professional drummer who sang, played, and had Ringo Starr time. And he was in one of Britain's best ensembles, particularly in Liverpool, before we even had a drummer. In 2008, Paul seconded Larry King's motion, noting, "We were tremendous fans of his." Number 9. Unless you're Bernard Purdie, Ringo is a drummer's drummer. Anyone who claims Ringo can't play drums is likely to mention someone who was extremely technical during the same era as a better drummer, such as Cream's Ginger Baker or session drummer Steve Gadd. But all of those guys have stated that they admired Ringo. Baker told Rolling Stone before he became rock's bitterest old crab, "Yeah, whenever a new Beatles album came out, all the drummers would hurry out to get it to see what wonderful new stuff Ringo was doing." Gadd, he performed with Ringo and stated about him in a 2010 interview with MusicRadar.com. Ringo attends a different type of school, which I find both intriguing and hard. What he does, it's so distinct from what other drummers do. I want to be around someone that approaches music or their instrument in a unique way. There's something there for me to learn. What about Keith Moon? What about John Bonham? They're both Ringo's old drinking friends, and they're no longer alive. Bernard Purdie, the only living drummer to ever say anything negative about Ringo, claimed he overdubbed drums on 21 Beatles tracks, including She Loves You, and that Brian Epstein paid him $10,000 to keep quiet about it. The music industry vilified him for the easily proven bogus story, but it has now been uncovered that he overdubbed drums on the Beatles' 1961 songs backing Tony Sheridan. Anyone wondering why there are drum overdubs on My Bonnie and When the Saints Go Marching In should skip to reason number 3 right now. Number 8. Ringo saved the Beatles from an even worse fate than Best. We grabbed Pete Best merely because we needed a drummer the next day to travel to Hamburg. John Lennon once said of their long-sitting drummer before Ringo. They did, however, keep him for 2 years, one for each beat he knew how to play. Both of those beats may be heard on this recording of Besame Mucho from their failed 1962 Decca audition, as well as the thunderous bass drum known as the Atom Beat, which Best swore to Beatles writer Hunter Davies every drummer in Liverpool, even Ringo, copied. When the Beatles had their first professional session backing Tony Sheridan, producer Bert Kaempfert went nuclear over the Atom Beat, taking away Best's bass drum for the whole session. Number 7. The first time the Beatles stood firm against George Martin was in support of Ringo. When the Beatles insisted on Ringo playing drums on at least one take of Love Me Do, they established a precedent for Beatles recording sessions to be the give-and-take collaborative effort of 5 equals that they became famous for. No doubt that George Martin was the 5th Beatle. But, more importantly, Ringo was the 4th member of the Four-Headed Monster, without whom the Four-Headed Monster would have always been imbalanced. Number 6. Ringo was one of the greatest smilers of all time. Free of Pete Best's melancholy magnificence, the Beatles naturally grinned a lot more in images, which surely hastened Beatlemania, especially in America, where a cheerful phenomenon was greatly required after seeing our president slain. Okay, all four Beatles pitched a Moody on the cover of Meet the Beatles, but Pete Best was long gone by then. The album cover's subtle effort at humor was to place the smallest Beatle underneath the other three. If you're enjoying the video so far, hit the like button and comment down below and subscribe for more Beatles content. Number 5. When the Beatles arrived in America, Ringo proved to be the most popular, expanding their fan base to include toddlers and the press. Ringo was the most clearly identified of the Beatles to the short-sighted American press, who were ready to discard the Beatles if it weren't for Ringo's self-deprecating humorous wit, which counterbalanced John's stinging sarcasm. And Ringo was unquestionably the most popular with fans, as evidenced by the amount of novelty singles dedicated to the lovable nose in 1964. I Want to Know Your Secret, Ringo, Pat Winter. An answer record to Do You Want to Know a Secret, despite George being the primary singer on that song. The Young World Singers, Ringo for President, in the UK by Rolf Harris. He Doesn't Talk About War on the Huge Dance Floor is a key platform. Rex Miller, Ringo's Doctor, a first single in the style of Dickie Goodman, and, believe it or not, far less amusing, Lorne Greene's Ringo. During the height of Beatlemania, the Ponderosa pop singer made a fortune off this chart-topping gunslinger ballad about an outlaw named Ringo. Don Bowman did a cover of The Other Ringo 2 years later, chronicling his Beatles addiction in a hillbilly voice. I Love You, Ringo, Bonnie Joe Mason. This was Cher's first professional recording as a lead vocalist. The album, issued on Phil Spector's Annette label, is claimed to have failed to chart because DJs felt she sounded like a guy. It was also co-written by future Beatles overproducer and killer Phil Spector and future Ringo collaborator Vinnie, oh my, Poncia. Number 4. Ringo had the most say on his instrument. Sure, many bassists today credit Paul as a huge influence, but his bass parts weren't even discernible on records until they'd released 4 albums. The thunderous start to She Loves You, for example, has Ringo's backward drum fills. He played lefty on a right-footed kit. The drum coda of From Me to You, the snare crack of Anytime at All, the Latin rhythms in I Feel Fine, the way Ringo forecasts Keith Moon's wild abandon with his playing on Long Tall Sally are the closest things to a drum solo he'd attempted until Abbey Road. Ringo's playing is connected with unfettered delight more than any other Fab Four instrumentalist. When the Beatles became famous, every record producer tried to find seasoned session drummers like Hal Blaine who could perform like Ringo. No one had a more energizing effect on their instrument of choice than Ringo. While sales of Hofner basses and Rickenbacker and Gretsch guitars skyrocketed following their first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, Ludwig Drum Company had $6.1 million in sales by the end of 1964. Sales had more than doubled to $13.1 million 2 years later, and the company had to build drums 24 hours a day to keep up with demand. Number 3. In all 5 Beatles films, Ringo supplied the most comic relief. Ringo received the most positive reviews for his performance in A Hard Day's Night. Thus, it was only natural that they would center help around him. Ringo is the reason why everyone in the film wanted to kill the Beatles in that film. By the next summer, John's bigger than Jesus comment was the reason everyone wanted to kill the Beatles for real. Ringo is the only Beatle in Magical Mystery Tour who has any scripted lines, as opposed to George, who says only 2 words in the entire film. Yellow Submarine recreates A Hard Day's Night sad sack Ringo in cartoon form with psychedelic flares. Okay, so Let It Be isn't a laugh riot. What with Paul bossing everyone around, George quitting the band, and John addicted to heroin and Yoko, but Ringo provides the light-hearted moments, clowning with Paul on the piano, making Maka's daughter Heather laugh with his double takes, and playing Octopus Garden for the first time for George's Harrison and Martin. Number 2. Ringo kept the Beatles grounded no matter how far they went. What song preserved the Beatles' presence on the airwaves when they were feeling the effects of the bigger than Jesus controversy? Something simple, like Yellow Submarine. When the Beatles traveled to India for an undetermined period of time, Ringo was the first to return. complaining that the food was too hot, when the others were in danger of overindulging themselves while recording new sounds for Sgt. Pepper. They could always walk into the waiting area, where Ringo was learning to play chess, and persuade him to come play something that would make their most abstract song ideas as palpable as a heartbeat. No song better exemplifies how Ringo responded to vocals than A Day in the Life, as his dramatic fills respond to John's words and lend the necessary urgency that propels the song until the orchestral build-up tag teams it. Number 1. Ringo refused to perform solos. The year 1968 was the year of the drum solo, with every drummer requesting that his band give the drummer some. Iron Butterfly's In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, Cream's Ginger Baker's Showcase, Toad, and the Rascals' 13-minute Dino Daniele Jazz Excursion, Boom, were also hits that year, with Ian Pace's solo for Deep Purple's Concerto for Group and Orchestra, and John Bonham's showcase for Led Zeppelin, Moby Dick. 1969 would be even more extravagant. Compare all of this to Ringo, who would only do a 15-second token solo on The End. Because of his reluctance to brag, the Beatles' albums had more space on them for actual tunes. If that isn't a reason to put in Ringo for president, I don't know what is. Ringo was universally adored and will be remembered as an essential member of the band. This concludes our video. We hope you enjoyed it. If so, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Before you go, let us know in the comments which Beatle you like best and why. We'd love to hear your answers. See you in the next one.